And now I'm going to have Riggs come up and introduce our program for today, which I know is going to be absolutely outstanding. And keep an eye open, there is still more food to come. Come over there and then we'll have them over here.
Hello, welcome members and guests. It is the Northwest Business Club's honor and pleasure to have a special guest to introduce today. Without a further ado, and by the way, I've got a canned presentation here. Anyway, Mr. Herb Meyer is host and producer of The Siege of Western Civilization, a DVD outlining the threats to our security, our economy, and our culture that became an international bestseller. During the Reagan administration, Herb served as Special Assistant to the Director of Central Intelligence, Vice Chairman of the CIA's National Intelligence Council. In those positions, he managed production of the U.S. National Intelligence Estimates and other top-secret projections for the President and his national security advisors. Herb is widely credited with being the first senior U.S. government official to forecast the collapse of the Soviet Union, a forecast for which he later was awarded the U.S. National Intelligence Distinguished Service Medal, which is the intelligence community's highest honor. Formerly an associate editor of Fortune, he has authored several books including The War Against Progress, Real World Intelligence, and Hard Thinking. Herb and his wife Jill are co-authors of How to Write, which is among this country's most widely used writing handbooks. Formerly an associate editor, Herb's essays on intelligence and politics have been published in the Wall Street Journal, National Review Online, and Policy Review. Oh, and the American Thinker. He is the author of 2 new ebooks, How to Analyze Information, a step-by-step guide to life's most vital skill, and The Cure for Poverty, which explains how the free market works and how entrepreneurs create jobs. Additionally, Herb is a frequent guest on leading television and radio talk shows. Need I say more? Let's give Herb Meyer a warm and welcome. Welcome.
Thank you for inviting me. Is that working? Can you hear it okay? Or is that not on?
You're on.
We on? That's better, isn't it? That working?
Yep.
Good. Speak into the mic. We'll get it. Thanks for inviting me. It's good to be with you again. As a lot of you know, these days I travel just about constantly on the lecture circuit. I'm all over the country. I'm outside the country. And it's become a habit over the years that after the event is over, crowd disperses, I'm on my own for a bit, I've got a few minutes to kill, or I'm back at the airport, or I'm back at my hotel. I call home, and I talk to Jill and kind of check in, and she always says, "How did it go?" I can't wait to call her this afternoon. When she says, "How did it go? Did anybody show up?" I'm going to say, "Are you kidding? They ran out of food." That is the coolest thing any speaker could possibly say. It's Bush's fault. So. I want to talk to you about what I believe is the biggest thing happening in the world. Its impact on our country, on ourselves, and by the way, on Bellingham, will be enormous. And politics being what it is today, nobody talks about it. It's one of those things, it's huge, and absolutely no one notices. Before we get into that, just one point. I've been messing around with all this stuff, foreign policy, national security, politics, for a long time now. In the last few years, a trend has developed in our country that's unhealthy. We argue before we understand. That's not a smart thing to do. It sets a terrible example for our children. When there are complicated and contentious issues, honorable people will disagree about what to do. That's fine. That's how we figure out our way forward. Intelligent people should be able to reach a common understanding of what the problem is before we start yelling and screaming, and we don't do that anymore. It's a shouting match. Look at some of the political campaigns, watch any of the talk shows. Even when I'm on one of the talk shows, it's unbearable. Everybody shouts past everybody else. No one's listening. The one thing you never hear from a talking head is, gee, I hadn't thought about that. I changed my mind. And nobody changes their mind. By the way, the average elapsed time it takes for a talking head to form an opinion is 4 billionths of a second. The deep thinkers will take 9 billionths of a second. And then they won't change their minds. It's not a good way to work. Let's leave the politics out of this for the next few minutes. I want to talk to you about, as I say, what I believe is the biggest thing happening in the world and what it's going to mean to us, and particularly here in Bellingham. And the biggest thing happening in the world is this. The world is getting rich fast. Here are the actual numbers. By 1980 or 1990, about 2 billion human beings had crossed the line out of poverty. Since then, about another 500 million have come out of poverty. A lot of them in China and India. In the last 6 years, 20 million Brazilians have crossed the line out of poverty. Today, on the continent of Africa, the number of people with disposable income is just over 350 million. When you put all the numbers together, here's what you've got. Each year, between 50 million and 100 million human beings cross the line out of poverty. The low estimate's 50, the high estimate's 100. I think it's been closer to the high estimate. With numbers that big, you can't be too precise. You're dealing in ranges. With the global recession, maybe it's a little bit at the lower end. So each year, 50, 60, 70, 75 million human beings are crossing the line out of poverty. And what it means is this. If we can continue this trend, maybe even pick it up a little bit, within your lifetimes, certainly within our children's lifetimes, the world will be out of poverty. The majority of human beings will not be poor. That will be one of the greatest moments in world history. It will happen within our lifetimes, within our children's lifetimes, and absolutely no one will notice it. On the day it happens, the headline will be some Hollywood starlet's getting her 10th divorce, or Joe Biden said something stupid. This is an enormous trend. The world's coming out of poverty. It isn't going to be poor. Why is it happening? Because we figured it out. That's why. You know, some things you need a genius to figure out. Jonas Salk and the polio vaccine. One day another genius will come along and develop a pill that prevents dementia or cures heart disease. Other things, you don't need a genius. Simple example is physical fitness. You want to be physically fit, eat sensibly, and get a lot of exercise. Everybody knows that. You don't need a PhD from Harvard. Okay? Well, if you want to bring a population out of poverty, it's the free market. Property rights, the rule of law, reasonable regulation and taxation. Put that in place and kaboom, your population comes out of poverty. All over the world, people understand that now. They've learned. There are very few places left in the world that don't understand how the free market is the cure for poverty. Unfortunately, 2 of those places are Olympia and Washington, D.C. But everywhere else, they get it. And all over the world, governments are putting in place the free market mechanisms to pull their populations out of poverty. And the result is the most stunning development in our lifetimes, possibly in world history. The emergence of a global middle class. And I'll give you an odd example of what this looks like. One night, a few months ago, in a hotel room, the wireless system went down in the room. So, you know, you get frantic, you gotta check your email. So you call the front desk and they put you through to the technical helpline. And I was talking to a perfectly nice kid. Sounded like he was in San Diego in college working an evening job with whatever this technical company was. And he figured out that the router on the floor of my hotel had gone down. He was gonna reboot the router. So we had a couple of minutes to kill while the router rebooted, and we were just chatting. And he said that he was at the end of his shift. I was his last call. When he finished, he was going to catch up with some friends, get some dinner. Maybe they'd go to a movie or do something like that. And at one point in the conversation, I said, by the way, where are you? And he said, oh, I'm in Guatemala City. I said, what are you doing in Guatemala City? He said, I'm Guatemalan. I said, I'm sorry. I have absolutely no idea. By the way, a half hour before I called him, I talked to my son Tom in Boston. Tom was finishing his work shift, was going to get together with some friends for dinner, maybe go out for a movie. All over the world, in countries you wouldn't think of, people are leading a middle-class life. You know, if you pick up the phone to order something from my company or yours or LL Bean, you know how often the call bounces to India or the Philippines? What a lot of people don't realize is how often they're bouncing your call somewhere else. There's a company in Nairobi called Kenya Call Center. Well, you know, if you're sitting at a call center in Nairobi, you're in an office building, you've got a computer on the table, set of headphones on, comfortable chair, you finish your work shift, you jump in the car, you pick up your kid at the daycare center, stop by the supermarket for something for dinner. There's a chain of supermarkets based in South Africa called Massmart. Walmart's buying them. There's another chain down there called Nakulat. They put up big box stores all over Africa, like Costco. You pick up something for dinner, you go home, flip on the 42-inch flat screen TV, catch up on the news while you get dinner on the table. After supper, you help the kids with the homework, you walk the dog, you put around in the garden, you go to some church choir practice, you run your kids over to some high school soccer match or play rehearsal or PTA meeting. All over the world, in countries most people have never heard of, even I can't find on a map, there are now middle-class societies leading the same kinds of lives you and I lead. This is the biggest, most important trend in the world, and as I say, absolutely no one in politics or public affairs wants to notice this or talk about it. It's a very good thing for several reasons. First reason is a lot of kids not hungry. That's just wonderful. That so many young people will lead healthy lives. By the way, when we say out of poverty, it's not a dollar amount. What it means is this. You've got a good roof over your head. There's enough food to eat. The children have been inoculated against the childhood illnesses. They're getting up in the morning, you're getting the kids off to school, at least one of the parents is off to work, there's an income. That's what it means to be out of poverty. And you're heading into a world in which the overwhelming majority of people will have emerged from poverty. That's wonderful. The second reason it's so good is this. People like us don't go to war with people like us. We just don't do that. We can disagree. We'll argue about it. We'll go to debates. We'll have elections. We don't start shooting. Okay? Look at Europe right now. Europe's in terrible, terrible financial trouble. Boy, is that a mess. We could spend all afternoon talking about the mess Europe's in. There isn't going to be a war. Greece isn't forming an army secretly. Neither is Germany. This is the first time ever in European history they've been in trouble. There isn't going to be a world war. It's going to be another meeting of the finance ministers. They'll go out for dinner. They'll figure it out. What a change. As you have middle-class societies develop. Middle-class life's busy. You get up in the morning, you get your kids off to school, you get to work, come home, you just want to see if the kid passed that math test he never studied for, catch up with friends, walk the dog, get some exercise, watch a movie on TV. People would rather shop than fight. And you're heading into a world in which for the first time ever, the majority of people are going to live like that. And that's a safer world. Now, no one with my background is a Pollyanna. You're never going to eliminate war completely. But you're going to make it much less likely. The kinds of big wars with armies and aircraft carriers and tanks, just not going to see those anymore. People like us don't do that kind of thing. We have other things to do with our time and money, and that's a very good thing. Now, as a practical matter, if you're going to bring 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 billion people out of poverty, you cannot do it with everyone designing software. The world doesn't work like that. You need stuff. You need power stations. You need sewage treatment facilities, water plants. You need houses, factories, shops, shopping centers, office complexes, hotels, hospitals. You're looking at the greatest burst of industrialization and construction in recorded history. as dozens of countries create the infrastructure for a middle class. You also need food. As the world comes out of poverty, they're going to eat better. In the last 8 years, meat consumption in China has more than doubled. Boy, is that a lot of cows and pigs. Well, they eat corn. And that's why corn prices have gone up and up and up. That's why food prices keep going up. Because it's the world coming out of poverty, eating more food. By the way, it turns out when people can do it, they eat bread. Human beings eat bread, okay? That's why wheat prices have gone up every year. More and more people are coming out of poverty. More and more people are eating more bread. Now, if the price of bread goes up in Bellingham, it will make no difference in how much bread you eat. A year ago, January, in Egypt and in Tunisia, the world price of wheat kicked over the line to where, for the first time ever, poor people in Egypt and Tunisia could not afford their daily loaf of bread. That was the actual trigger that set off the revolutions. The world was getting so rich so fast, they got left behind. Boom. Couldn't afford bread, they were out into the streets. So you're going to need food. And then you get to the other thing you're going to need to bring the world out of poverty. Fuel. Energy. If you're going to bring people out of poverty, they're going to live in decent houses, okay? If they live in decent houses, you got to heat and cool those houses. You got to light them up. They're going to have appliances in those houses like you and I have in our houses. They're going to have washers and dryers and television sets and computers and telephones and all that other stuff, and fans and air conditioners. You're going to need water treatment plants and sewage facilities as people are living decently and cleanly for the first time ever. And if you're going to bring 5, 6, 7 billion people out of poverty, they're going to need jobs. Well, you're going to need factories. The factories use a lot of power. And some people are going to work in office buildings. You're going to have to build office buildings, and office buildings chew up a lot of power, particularly in hot climates where you have to cool them down. And you're going to need shopping centers, malls, and schools for the kids that are clean and well lit and cooled and heated. And hospitals and hotels and everything else you can think of. This is why energy prices are going up. It's not me and you jumping in the Cadillac Escalade and driving to the mall or the country club. It's the world emerging out of poverty quickly, using more and more fuel. And you can no sooner tell a country emerging from poverty to use less fuel than you can tell a teenager to stay out of the refrigerator. I mean, what do you think? Lie down, you won't be hungry? A child's body has 3 to 4 quarts of blood. An adult's body has 5 to 6 quarts of blood. It's bigger. This is what's driving up energy prices. The world's coming out of poverty. That's a wonderful thing. And this completely changes the energy conversation. Conservation's terrific. I hope all of you walked here or came here by bike. Even if you did, it's got nothing to do with this. You're bringing 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 billion people out of poverty. Their demand for energy, for fuel, is enormous. And that gets you here to Bellingham. I was home last week, first time in a while, and some kid knocks on my door. Pleasant-looking kid, said he's a student at Western Washington. And would I sign a petition opposing the coal terminal here in Bellingham? I said, oh, hi. What's your plan for increasing the world supply of fuel? And he looked at me and says, well, I don't want to increase the world supply of fuel. What a little creep. Without a second thought, by the way, what the hell, what do they teach up there? Probably the same thing they teach at Harvard and everywhere else, which is the worst thing that ever happened to planet Earth is humanity. We pollute, we use resources. If only you could get rid of people, it would be a much better place to live. He just condemned 7 billion people to endless poverty. That's what's at stake. By the way, I don't have a stake in the coal terminal here. I don't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea. What I know is this. You cannot bring the world out of poverty without more fuel, period. And by the way, if you want to grow enough food for 7 billion people coming out of poverty, it takes a lot of fuel to grow food. Energy is the key to everything, okay? This kid understood nothing. They just taught him that people like me and you are wasting energy. And if we would stop doing that, wouldn't the world be a nice place? He hasn't a clue of the damage he's doing. Literally, of the lives he's destroying. This weekend, I was at a church picnic with Jill's church. I was chatting with one of the county commissioners out in Friday Harbor. They're slightly to the left of Lenin. Okay? Basic problem with Lenin, didn't go far enough. You know, if you'd have shot a few more, could have really got it right. That's where it all went wrong. Perfectly nice, pleasant lady. And she's also against the depot here. And I explained this to her over hot dogs. And she said, well, you know, in 20 or 30 years, there could be new kinds of energy that would be clean and you wouldn't need the coal and all that. Well, yeah, people will starve to death in less than 20 years. You know, if somebody's bleeding on the sidewalk, that's not the time for a discussion of how to reform the health care issue. Okay, if someone's starving to death, that's not when you talk about, gee, there may be healthier, better foods available 10 years from now. They need it now. They need it this minute. And that's what you're looking at. This is the debate we need to have. And by the way, no one is talking about this. The world is getting richer faster. It's emerging from poverty. But if we don't make the energy available, they can't do it, period. Now listen, we could cut our own energy consumption 30%. Probably technically impossible, but let's say we did it. Let's say you cut your caloric intake 30%, which I guess we almost did here this afternoon. You still haven't got enough food and fuel to feed 7 billion people. Look at the scale. Look at what you're talking about. And these little creeps who are out getting people to sign petitions have no idea. Now, if they said, well, look, I don't want the terminal here, but here's the way we go about it, fine. But they don't want the Keystone Pipeline either. And they don't want nuclear power either. And they don't want to drill in Alaska, and they don't want to drill in the Gulf, and they don't want to drill off Florida. You know, I'll give that little creep credit. He said the truth. He doesn't want to increase the supply of energy. That's what they want. If we don't increase the supply of energy, we'll be okay. Our lives won't change all that much. But you've just killed 7 billion people. There's one last reason we need to get our act together on this. And it also never gets talked about, and it's this. The world is coming out of poverty quickly. Each year, between 50 and 100 million human beings are crossing that line out of poverty. That means the total customer base for every product and service we can sell is now growing at a rate of 50 to 100 million new customers every year. Wow. Now, these customers may not be where we would like them to be. We may have to change the products and services we're selling to reach them. But when you stop and think about it, their demand for our goods and services is so huge. That's how we're going to get out of the debt. That's how we're going to pay out the deficits. That's how we're going to create jobs for our children. When you turn on the TV and you see these young people in Syria and Egypt and Tahrir Square, they're demonstrating, whatever, on the news they say they're students, they're insurgents, they're revolutionaries. Now, the precise technical word for all these young people is our future customers. That's who they are. You know, your average kid marching in Syria right now, or Egypt, Tahrir Square in Cairo, probably knows more about the new iPad than I do. And I've got one. He can probably tell you more features than I know of them. He's never seen one. Knows all about it. He knows what movies are playing. He's got a Facebook account. What these young people know is that it's possible to organize a society so that you can get an education, get a job, have a place to live, get together with your friends after work, get married, settle down, have a couple of kids, have a decent place to live, have a washer and a dryer, relax on a weekend, and they want it. By the way, I was giving a speech somewhere else, and I mentioned that these are basically Tea Party people. If you actually stop and listen to these kids in Egypt and Syria and Iraq and everywhere else, they just want the lunatics off their back. They just get out of my way. Someone will start a business, someone will hire me, I'll have a job, I'll have a place to live. Just get the crazies out of here. That's exactly what the Tea Party wants. Get the lunatics off my back. I'll take care of this. And it's astounding that they want the same thing we do. They're human beings. There's such a thing as human nature. People wish to be left alone. Leave them alone. They'll self-organize. People will form businesses. They'll hire other people. They'll have incomes. They'll buy goods and services. They'll settle down. They'll raise families. They'll need more incomes, more goods and services. What you're looking at is the most extraordinary expansion of the customer base that's ever happened in world history. By the way, over the last couple of years, I've got a publishing company, and we've moved everything into ebooks. It is astounding to me that while I'm here talking to you, someone's downloading one of my books in a country even I can't find on a map. That's a different customer than I've had at the Barnes & Noble up the street. That's what's happening. The way companies are looking at it is this. We want to bring the world out of poverty, and we know how. It's the free market, property rights, the rule of law, reasonable regulation and taxation, and so forth. And we want to do this not just for their sake, but for our own. The trick is to do it without trashing the planet. If you bring the world out of poverty, but you do it in a way that the water's polluted, you can't drink it, the air's filthy, you're choking to death, it's a disaster. But the one thing we can never say to these people is, no, sorry, too late. I've got a big house, 2 SUVs, you can't. That's stupid and it's inhuman. The fortunes are being made by those businesses that can develop products and services that are clever, inexpensive, and green. And that's why you're hearing that. This is no longer an environmental issue. This is now the core driving issue of global business. To bring the world out of poverty, but to do it without trashing the planet. Isn't that an interesting problem? That's actually kind of fun. You all know IKEA, but you've probably never seen the IKEA house. They don't sell it in North America. It's about 900 square feet. Looks exactly the way you think an IKEA house would look. You can't quite put it on top of your car and drive it home, but close. And you screw it together on a slab. It's clever, it's inexpensive, made out of materials that don't rot in a hot climate. There's a company in China that's marketing a house. It's very small, they probably wouldn't let you build it around here. It's even got the wiring in it. You literally screw it together and plug it in. Clever, inexpensive, green. In India, the Tata Group launched the Nano, $2,500 car for the emerging middle class. The Tata Group has announced they will invent a new kind of housing module for the world's emerging middle class. Each module will sell for about $8,600. Now, you may not want it, I may not want it. Watch out, these Tata guys are really smart, and that's going to be something, okay, for an emerging middle class. Honda announced that it will invent a $500 motorcycle. E-books, a perfect example. If you want to buy one of my printed books, buy the book. I'll cut down a tree to make it for you, burn fuel, shipping it to you at Amazon or Barnes & Noble, or you download the e-book. Same content, no environmental damage, fraction of the cost, clever, inexpensive, green. The Japanese Trade Ministry issued a directive to all Japanese companies, develop products and services for a customer base that has between $4 and $24 per day disposable income. That's your emerging middle class. You know, you and I can go to Costco or Walmart and get a gigantic box of laundry soap. Now, it's very cheap because of the size of it, but you need the cash to buy it. Well, these people haven't got that big cash outlay. So companies like Procter & Gamble are learning to package things smaller and cheaper so they can come back once a week and get some, as they have more wages. The key words are clever and expensive and green. And if there's one thing we need to tell our kids in college, whether they're at Western Washington or Harvard or Stanford, it's this. You never shut up about how smart you are. Fine, figure this out. Within your generation, we can bring the entire world out of poverty. To do it without trashing the planet will be the trick. What an interesting problem for young people to deal with. That's actually fun. And that's what these kids should be focusing on. That's what they need to learn. Not mindlessly stopping a project that may actually provide the fuel somebody needs to have a home, have a job, get to a hospital. When I worked for President Reagan, my job was to take a look way out in front and tell the president what we thought was going to happen. Sometimes we got it right. Let me do that one more time with you. I know we've got huge problems, the deficits and the debt, and we can be at this all afternoon talking about that. Here's what I think's going to happen. Within our lifetimes, the lifetime of many of you here, if not in your kids' lifetimes, the world will cross a line that's never been crossed in history. The world will be out of poverty. The world won't be poor. The most powerful force in the world will be a global middle class. People going about their business, getting the kids off to school, going to work, coming home, shopping, getting together with friends, watching the movie on TV, not looking for a war, just looking to get onto it, get their kids into a decent school, maybe get the new washer and dryer they saw advertised. That's the world we're going to be looking at. That's where we're actually headed. The only country capable of leading us across that line is the United States. There's no one else who can do it. If we lead, this will happen sooner and less violently. If we abandon the leadership, it'll happen anyway, but it'll take longer, it'll be sloppier, more violent, more people will be hurt along the way. But one way or the other, we're going to get there. The world we're heading into is extraordinary. People won't be poor. Of course there'll be poverty, not everybody makes, I understand that. But the world's going to be out of poverty, powered by a middle class. Their demand for our goods and services will be so huge that it will pay out the debt, clear off the deficits, and create more jobs than we've got kids to fill those jobs. Do we have problems? Sure. Will things go wrong? Of course they will. Will we make mistakes? Yes. Can honorable people disagree about this policy or that? Of course we will. But that's what we're looking at. There are some of us who are looking at all this and saying, if we play this right, if we go forward with this and not let us get stopped by all these opponents, we may trigger an era of economic growth, the likes of which we've never seen. There are serious economists who are looking at the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years and saying this could be a sonic boom. I'm in a minority. I think that with a little luck, if we play this right, if we make the right decisions on who we elect, our children could live through a supersonic boom. Look, we're all grown-ups. Everything's difficult. We make mistakes. Everything costs a little more, takes a little longer than we want. But boy, when you blow past all the idiot politics, when you look at what's in front of us, when you look at how close we are to what will be the greatest moment in human history, and possibly an era of prosperity and jobs for our kids that we've never dreamed of. Wow. Do we have problems? Yes. Will everything be difficult? Sure. Will it be perfect? No. But Boy, I cannot imagine a more optimistic or a more exciting time to be alive. And thank you for listening to me.
We have plenty of time for questions, but before that, there is more food. So those of you that were unable to get fish, there's a plate full of fish. Bring your plate up, get some more fish, get some more salad, and then ask questions. Okay. Stand up when you're recognized, give your name, and ask your question.
Ray Radke, in line with what you have been saying, a few weeks ago I was chatting with an ex-Marine graduate who had graduated from Western. And while we were at the VFW bar, and while we were chatting, he gets a vibration on his phone. And it turns out that he is in the business of buying and selling parts for semi-exotic motorcycles. And that phone ringing was a guy in Germany asking if he had a particular light for a motorcycle that he had. And he's got a little storage bin somewhere, and he's got this collection of motorcycle parts. And I was just amazed at that transaction. He made quite a bit of money there. Yeah. Well, just sitting at the bar. My business.
U.S. exports are going up at about 20% a year. Deere, the tractor people, are selling tractors in countries they never heard of, because farmers are using them, growing the food, doing it. And as they come out of poverty, they buy more stuff and stuff. So the answer is yes. That's happening all over the place. And it's invisible. And most of the people we elect to most of the offices haven't a blinking clue.
Appreciate your talk today. The propensity of any government as they see wealth growing is to grab the wealth. And if you look at what you described worldwide, could you give some observations as to how you see this growth in wealth playing out in different parts of the world? Are there governmental units responding to that? Are they being more freely engaging into the market forces versus being more confiscatory to that wealth?
Good question. Here's the real answer to that question. If you go back and study history, one of the great developments in Western civilization is science. What we said is, we can figure this out. And we figured out that the Earth actually goes around the sun, and we figured out what gravity is, and we learned how the human body works. And what we did is we set aside magic. We said, no, this is it. This is how it works. It was Western civilization's acceptance of science and putting aside magic and all the baloney that made us what we are. That's why Western civilization led the world. We figured it out, okay? And when people said, well, the sun actually goes around the Earth, we stopped paying attention to them because that's silly. We know better, okay? Well, we've been at politics and economics for a long time now. Haven't we learned anything? Don't we know what happens when you raise taxes on the business owners? Of course we do. And what's so frustrating is when you listen to the political dialogue today, I don't mean to be political, but there's no way to answer your question without it. The Democrats are acting like we haven't learned anything. They're acting like witch doctors in the 17th century who refuse to accept that the Earth goes around the sun, or that gravity works in this way, and the human body pumps blood through the heart, and so forth. We're actually unlearning things. And that's where we're going wrong. You watch Fox News, right? Fair and balanced. If they have some astronaut on talking about landing on Mars, they're not going to have some clown on who says the Earth's flat. Because we know it isn't, okay? And yet if you have someone on who says if you hold tax rates down among the business owners and the entrepreneurs, they'll go out and create more jobs, then you have some moron who says the opposite. As though we didn't know better. But we do. And the biggest problem we face is this refusal by so many people to recognize what we've learned. Okay? And that's where we keep going wrong. And by the way, not everything's political. Okay, I'll give you an example. Look, here's my cell phone. It's got an operating system in it. If you want to do something with it, you do it the way the operating system is built to work. There's no Republican way to make a phone call. There's no Democratic way to do it. There isn't even a libertarian way to do it. Right? You just do it. You don't like it, get a different operating system. But you go with the operating system. Well, an economy is an operating system. If you wanted to do something, for example, create jobs, then you have to go about it the way the operating system is designed to work. Why aren't we creating jobs? Because we keep doing things that are incompatible with the operating system. That's why. And what's so infuriating is that's not political. If I say to you, you want to make a phone call, tap the home key, slide the switch, and hit the icon, that's not Herb's right-wing conservative neo-fascist interpretation. That's how it works. Do you want to create jobs? Cut tax rates. We know that. And it's this endless refusal to recognize that that's killing us. You know, we don't debate whether the Earth's flat anymore, and yet we're debating things we've long since learned. The reason the rest of the world is moving forward is they figured it out. By the way, if you look at the continent of Africa, the number of African leaders who are graduates of the University of Chicago with degrees in economics is stunning. They're all Milton Friedman types. And their attitude is this: listen, forget colonialism. That was like my great-grandfather. You know, the Brits haven't been here in 100 years. Let's stop whining. You know, if a 14-year-old wants to blame his problems on mommy and daddy, it's okay. Not when you're 45. It's like uncool. Right? They're saying, listen, stop blaming colonialism, the Brits. Get on with it. Come on, let's get cell phones. Let's get a satellite download thing going. Let's build something. So all over Africa, you're getting governments putting in place free market mechanisms that are pulling their populations out of poverty. And what's so horrible is that precisely the moment they're doing this, we're turning away from it. And that's what's scary. I used to know Jonas Salk, the Salk polio vaccine, and knowing Jonas was a privilege. And one night I was talking with Jonas. It was actually 2 nights before he died. And I said, what worries you the most as you look ahead in the world? Remember, this is a human being who saved more lives than almost any human being who ever lived. Okay? And I said, what worries you the most? He liked to talk about things like that. And he thought for a moment and he said, we're beginning to forget things we've already learned. Ooh, is that a scary thought? And he's right. We're beginning to forget things we've already learned. You are entitled to your opinion of whether you want vanilla ice cream or chocolate ice cream. You're entitled to whether you want an iPhone or an Android. But if you have an iPhone, this is how you do it. If you have a free market economy, we know how to create jobs. Why aren't we creating jobs? Because we're doing things that are incompatible with the operating system. That's like saying, well, if you think so, go ahead and make a phone call by rubbing the phone on your arm and then slamming it on the table. And when it doesn't work, I say, well, slam it harder. And that's what we're doing. And it's crazy. That's why we're in trouble.
Yeah, we hear a lot that growth is a damaging thing. And that the only way to sustain the world is to not grow. Which doesn't seem to make sense to me. How do you deal with questions about growth management?
We all deal with them all the time. It's an absolutely idiotic point of view. Okay? But by the way, not your question's fine, but the point of view is idiotic. You know, someone did the calculation. If you took the entire population of the world and made them all families of 4 people each, and gave each one an 1,100 square foot house with a small garden, you could put the entire population of the world within the borders of Texas. Yeah, you can actually do the calculation and do it. It's not a problem. These are people who are frightened of their own shadows. They have no idea what growth looks like. And by the way, I've never met a hungry person against growth. You know, the person I always meet against growth has an iPad, he's got the iPhone 4, he's got designer sunglasses, the frames are about $400, okay? And he's sipping a latte over at a Starbucks. It's actually a vicious argument. Maybe I'm getting old, but I just have no patience for it anymore. The Earth can handle it, okay? The Earth can do, as you know, the Earth can do fine. And these people haven't a blinking clue. And I'm just kind of losing patience with it because we're so close to bringing these people out of poverty. All they want us to do is get out of that way. So that's the argument. And that doesn't happen in schools. I don't teach that. Yeah, go ahead and then wrap it up.
Okay. Would you define the brotherhood, the Arab Brotherhood, and
Muslim Brotherhood.
I'm sorry, Muslim Brotherhood. Thank you. And its role in the Arab Spring. And you just talked about this huge growing customer base that we have throughout the Middle East. Is this spring with quotes around it going to be compromised by the Muslim Brotherhood?
Okay, let me give you the real answer to the question, rather than the soundbite.
Okay.
And it's relevant to this. Follow me. Go back into history for a second. We're going to Europe at the end of the 17th century, 1690, 1695, something like that. Unless you were in that 0.5% at the top, life was terrible. Lifespan was early to mid-40s. Most people were half-starved most of the time. When they prayed that when the next famine came, at least some of your children might survive. People were illiterate, they were uneducated. Women weren't allowed to be educated. Nobody traveled. Most people spent their entire lives within 20 miles of wherever they were born. You had no say in how you were governed. You're a peasant, you're a serf, you shut up and did what you were told. And nothing changed. Tomorrow was the same as yesterday. The way your grandfather plowed the field, that's how you plowed the field, how your grandson would plow the field. If you were the woman of the house, the way you prepared meals, washed clothes, that's how your grandmother did it, your granddaughter would do it. Nothing changed. The modern world is very different. Lifespan is about 80 now, it's nearly doubled. Incomes vary widely, that bothers some people, but no one's starving. For the first time in human history, in the modern world, there's no starvation. In fact, we are told the greatest health problem faced by poor people is obesity. Imagine that. Women are educated, they run businesses, they run for political offices. People travel widely. Last flight I was on, I was seated as usual next to a world-weary 18-year-old. We have a say in how we're governed. Don't always like the outcome of elections. Boy, do we have a say in how we're governed. And nothing stays the same. The technical word for this kind of change is industrial productivity. The moment someone comes along and says, you know, there's a better way to do this, starts a business, hires people, then there's a whole new industry, there's a second industry, and a third. 10 years later, some new technology comes along, wipes out one of the industries, the new industry, then it happens again. It's like an escalator that never actually stops. That's us. That's the modern world. Look what it took to get us here. The 18th and 19th centuries were violent. 20th century was ghastly. World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Bosnia. Look what it took to get us here. When you look at the Islamic world now, what you're looking at is 1.5 billion people beginning to make the journey we began making more than 300 years ago. And what we keep saying to them is, can you guys do this by next Thursday? No, they can't. It's going to take longer. And that's what you're looking at. What you're looking at is the entire Islamic world beginning to write the code for version 2.0, to figure out how to reconcile that faith with the modern world. And that's where the Muslim Brotherhood fits in. They're trying to figure this out. There are good guys, there are bad guys. I don't think it's going to take them 300 years, but it won't take them 3 weeks either. But stand back from all the yelling and screaming and headlines. You're looking at 1.5 billion people on the road to modernity. That's what's happened. And by the way, if it wasn't for 9/11, that wouldn't happen. Oldest rule in the world. It's okay to hit the Americans. Don't hit them so hard they notice. Then they come out and kill you. The worst thing that bin Laden wanted to happen was this. He wanted to lock down the Islamic world to the 7th century, and the idiot blew it apart into the 21st. He made the biggest mistake he can make, hit the Americans too hard. We can spend all day arguing over Bush and should we have done this in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's a whole other conversation. You hit the Americans that hard, you blow it apart. And that's what's happened. So it's a mess. Of course it's a mess. But it's moving in the right direction. And you had a question. Thank you for being so patient.
I'm just curious, what's the role of the UN changing in all this? I mean,
The role of the UN?
Yeah.
Oh, to throw a banana peel under our feet every chance they get. I mean, that's what they do. What? You hadn't noticed? What? I can't hear you.
They want to impose worldwide growth management, basically.
Yeah.
Are they going to become increasingly irrelevant to everybody and just kind of wither and die?
It depends who we elect. I mean, the answer is if we elect the kind of government that will pay virtually no attention, then yeah, they'll become irrelevant, they'll wither away and die. If we elect the kind of people who think that's where world leadership should be, then they'll become more powerful. And that's one of the key issues you're looking at in the elections that lie in front of us. You have two very different perceptions of the world. One perception is, God knows we make mistakes, but we're the world's leader. We don't lead, no one leads. And the other is, we're the problem. So that's what it's about. We'll find out the answer to your question.
Yes, first of all, I'd like to say that President Reagan was very lucky to have you as an advisor.
Well, thank you. Nice thing to say. You were lucky to have him.
We all know that. And then I would like you to comment on the effects of the fracking of gas, which I have read is going to change the balance of power enormously as all countries begin to
The answer, I'm not an energy expert in that sense, but what's happening is this. At precisely that moment when a lot of the experts thought we're running out of oil, we're finding ways to get more oil out of the ground and to get a lot more natural gas out of the ground. And it's extraordinary. I mean, this is a wonderful, wonderful thing. You go back 150 years and there were talking heads running around saying we're running out of whale oil. Yeah, well, we were. He said, well, these guys with the internal combustion engine, it's not going to go anywhere. You know, the answer is you develop things. That's the genius of human beings. You get out of the way. So the answer is, yeah, there are going to be new kinds of energy. They're going to be wonderful. By the way, the United States is sitting on it. Okay, this is great. This is wonderful news. And we keep electing these idiots who shut it down. By the way, it's not that they're just doing something stupid. They're condemning 7 billion people to poverty. Okay, so the answer is, yeah, it's there.
Let me add something quickly. I sort of follow energy. And last month there was more electric power generation in this country, fueled by natural gas, than coal.
Yeah. The answer is we can do that.
Cogen plants.
Yeah, we can do
It's
this.
the first time it's ever happened.
Well, you know, one thing about the intellectuals, they're always wrong. But they're always wrong at precisely the moment when we're about to go over the top. I remember sitting in my office at the CIA. I was reading Arthur's book. He taught at Yale, Harvard, Paul Kennedy. And the whole point of his book is the United States' day was done and the Soviet Union was going to lead the world. And I had his book on my desk. And on the other part of my desk was the intelligence I was about to give to the president, showing him we're on the verge of winning the Cold War. They always get it wrong at precisely the moment. So, you know, just when these people are making their point, you know we're probably on the verge of winning.
Thank you, by the way, for coming.
Thank you.
Herb, it's obvious that the potential market to other countries from the United States is going to be oil, coal, and foodstuffs. What do you see as what will help jobs and industrialization in the United States so there'll be many jobs?
The answer is that I don't know the answer to your question, and that's precisely the point. No one is smart enough to figure it out. I'm selling ebooks around the world, but the guys who got it all organized are in San Francisco, so we're creating jobs for them. And the artist who designed the cover of the ebooks is in Michigan someplace. And Apple is down in California, and they're selling stuff in China and India. So the answer is, no one knows the answer to the question. You get out of the way and let the free market work, and people figure it out. And that's what all these Harvard guys in Washington don't get. They never held a job in their life. Okay? I mean that literally. They have no idea what it's like to work with someone. You know, I got an idea. And the next thing you know, you turn it into a product or a service and you sell it. So the answer is, I don't know. But that's the whole point. You can't know. You get out of the way. And Americans figure it out. And British and French and everyone else. That's the beauty of the free market.
Yes, thanks also. I think you've given the most stimulating and positive and valuable speech that will be given in this county this whole year. And do you have a written version that I could send to my 3 grown children, because they are unfortunately are buying into some of this anti-corporate 99% BS?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff on my website. I sort of do this talk all over the world, and people talk about it. Yeah, there is. I'll give you a card. It'll have the website on it. But thanks for asking. We okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
About 7 more minutes.
Yeah. The positive, I mean, I'm an optimist, but it's conventional wisdom right now is the recession that we've been in is altogether different than the one in the late 70s, early 80s, or others beforehand. And it's going to be years and years and years before we're out of this. There's just the old ways of cutting taxes or whatever else. And I understand, I mean, this may sound like a really ignorant question, but why haven't I read what you're saying, like in the Wall Street Journal, the positive part of it? I understand why the politicians aren't saying this or whatever, but why haven't I heard the optimistic?
Do you know that I'm asked that question at just about every event I speak at all over the world? And the answer to your question is, I don't know the answer to your question. It's become a thing to be pessimistic. And the worse you think things are, the more you need the experts. So they're never going to tell you we're on the verge of solving it. You know, back in, I guess it was 1983, I'm the one who wrote those memos to Reagan and said we're about to win the Cold War. And no one was saying this at the time. It was completely off the wall. And the memos sort of leaked out a little bit. It got to be a mess. They've now been declassified, by the way, and you can read them. I didn't even know they were declassified until someone told me last year. But at the time, they were highly classified, and they leaked out. And everybody was mad. Reagan's attitude was, gee, we're about to win the Cold War. That's wonderful. Sit down, tell me more. And everyone else said, shut up. Don't say that. I don't understand it. They're invested in pessimism. Because if everyone's pessimistic, you need them. The last thing I need is Rick Larson. Get him out of the way. Dan, please. He's not helping us. But he's going to tell you everything's bad and only he can solve it for you. Okay? So that's what they do. So the answer is, optimism's a harder thing to sell. And I don't have a better answer than that, but I'm frustrated like you are. Everywhere I speak, people say, why haven't I heard this? And then they buy the DVDs. It's all very flattering, but they don't want to hear it in Washington. I was telling someone the other night, I'm very lucky. I'm invited to speak all over the world, except in Washington, D.C. Maybe area code 202 doesn't work on my cell phone. Nobody wants to hear that. It's got to be pessimistic. Yes?
One last question.
You mentioned earlier that both sides of the political spectrum share a goal of job creation. One side sort of has a selective amnesia, and that's sort of preventing the goal. I have a different take that's maybe it's way too cynical, but I don't think that they share the common goal. I think that one side values equal outcome more than equality of opportunity. And I don't think job creation is really on the radar.
I agree with you.
And it
you're right.
So it's really not an amnesia. It's a willing. They have a higher goal.
Yes, I agree with you. Now, if you go back to Russia in the pre-revolutionary days, before the revolution of 1917, there was a group of revolutionaries. They were called nihilists, from the word nihilism, and their motto was "the worse the better," because the worse it gets, the more people will be ready for the revolution. So they wanted everything getting worse. Okay? The new word for nihilist is Democrat. Okay? They want it worse. They want to crash the healthcare system. So when they crash it, they can rebuild it their way. Yes, you're absolutely right. They want to crash the economy. Let's cut through all the baloney here. They want to crash the economy so they can rebuild it their way.
How about polluting our water supply?
Well, that too. Yeah. Anyway, listen.
It's a local issue.
You've been very generous to invite me again and to ask your questions, and thank you for letting me talk to you.
Everybody, Herb's website is on our Northwest Business Club site. So just go to our own site and you have the links to be able to read more, pick up more, and spread the word. How about a standing ovation? Remember that next month we have Roger Stark.